Hey there, sleepyheads. Welcome back to the channel. Before we drift into tonight's tale of the philosophy of Finn the Human, I'd love to know where in the world are you watching from tonight? And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's always magical seeing how far and wide this sleepy little community reaches. All right, lights low, blankets up. Let's begin. Finn the Human. Even his name feels simple, almost understated, as if he were just a small piece in the sprawling magical world of Ooo. But behind that simplicity lies something rare. Finn is the last known human in a land that has moved beyond humanity, a survivor of a world reshaped by the echoes of apocalypse. To understand the philosophy of Finn is to understand not only his action, but the quiet, beating heart of what it means to be human in a place where magic and madness reign. In his earliest years, Finn was not surrounded by other humans, but by creatures of every imaginable shape and spirit. He was adopted by Joshua and Margaret, the parents of Jake the dog, and raised in a family that was never ordinary, but always loving. Imagine that, sleepyheads. A little boy in a world of stretching dogs, talking candy people, and elemental being, growing up without ever feeling that he was missing something essential. His philosophy begins here with the idea that family is not about bloodlines, but about the bonds we choose, the people who nurture us, and the love that makes us whole. As Finn toddled through childhood, the land of Ooo unfolded before him like an enchanted storybook. Where other children might learn about schoolyards and bedtime routines, Finn's earliest lessons came from fighting off tiny monsters, watching magic ripple through the forest, and learning courage in the face of strangeness. Yet even then he carried something special, a sense of wonder that never faded into fear. His philosophy of innocence began not as naivety, but as trust in the world's hidden goodness. If you picture him in those younger days, you can almost see it, a boy with bright eyes, rushing forward with his little wooden sword, unafraid of the unknown. The creatures he faced were often bizarre, sometimes frightening, but Finn believed there was always a way forward. That belief that every challenge is an adventure waiting to be discovered formed the earliest foundation of his way of being. What makes Finn different is not just his bravery, but the purity of that bravery. Many heroes in stories fight because they must, because of duty or destiny. Finn fought because he wanted to help, because something in his heart refused to ignore the cries of others. Even as a child, he felt called to protect those who could not protect themselves. His philosophy of courage was not tied to conquest or power, but to compassion. And in this, we see the first great truth of Finn's human spirit, that innocence, when combined with kindness, becomes a source of strength greater than any weapon. And yet, beneath all of this lies a quiet loneliness. Finn did not know other humans. He did not grow up surrounded by people who looked like him or shared his history. His identity as the only human in Ooo might have been a source of despair for someone else, but for Finn, it became something different. It planted a seed of resilience, an understanding that who he was did not depend on who stood beside him, but on the choices he made. His philosophy began to form around this idea that being human is not about numbers or survival of a species, but about the spirit one carries and the values one lives by. Finn's childhood was filled with laughter, with Jake at his side, and a world of strange mentors and friends guiding him. But it was also filled with lessons that shaped his worldview. He learned that kindness could tame chaos, that courage could push back even the darkest shadows, and that love, whether from a stretchy dog brother or a gruff adoptive father, could make even the strangest world feel like home. There is a beautiful irony. The last human in Ooo is perhaps the most optimistic being in all of Ooo. While others fell into madness, greed, or despair, Finn held on to hope. His philosophy is born from the belief that even in a broken, magical, post-apocalyptic land, life is still worth living, still worth protecting. And maybe in some quiet way, his very existence becomes a reminder of what humanity once was and what it can still be. As Finn grew, he carried with him that bright-eyed innocence, though it was tested time and again. Each early adventure, each strange encounter, became a mirror reflecting the kind of human he wanted to be. And unlike many heroes whose philosophies are shaped by prophecy or burden, Finn's was shaped by choice. Choice to see the good, choice to keep going, choice to remain open, even when the world seemed closed around him. This, then, is the essence of the Child of Ooo, a boy whose philosophy of life was written not in books or lessons, but in the wild, unpredictable poetry of the world around him. A boy who chose to believe even when believing was hard. A boy whose humanity glowed brighter because it stood alone. And in the stillness of this reflection, we can begin to see how Finn's childhood, both ordinary and extraordinary, planted the seeds of the philosophy that would guide him for the rest of his life. As Finn began to understand the world around him, his philosophy was shaped not only by what he saw, but by what he did not see. There were no bustling human towns to wander through, no other children who shared his face or his story. In many ways, he grew up without a reflection. And yet, instead of this absence becoming a wound, it turned into a quiet determination to create his own path. Perhaps that is why Finn's actions feel so intentional, even in his youngest year. Every choice he makes is a way of declaring who he is, without anyone else telling him who he ought to be. The land of Ooo is filled with beings who are larger than life, ancient vampires who have lived through centuries, elemental rulers who embody the forces of nature, cosmic entities who reach beyond time itself. In contrast, Finn begins as small, fragile, and fleeting, and yet his philosophy teaches us that greatness is not measured by the scale of your power, but by the scale of your heart. He never asks whether he is strong enough to face the world, only whether he is brave enough to try. Growing up with Jake by his side, Finn learned that life could be playful even in the midst of danger. Their bond taught him that philosophy does not always have to be heavy or complicated. Sometimes it is as simple as laughing with your brother, even when shadows loom. This balance of play and seriousness becomes one of Finn's guiding lights. The idea that joy is not separate from heroism, but part of what makes it meaningful. Protecting the world is not only about fighting evil, it is about making room for laughter, music, and friendship within it. You can imagine him on quiet nights, lying beneath the strange skies of Ooo, where the stars glow in colors unknown to us. A child staring upward, wondering what lies beyond, but never feeling crushed by the mystery. For Finn, the unknown is not frightening. It is an invitation. And so his philosophy grows from curiosity. The willingness to walk into the woods, into the ruins, into the caves where monsters sleep, not to conquer, but to discover. And in that discovery, he begins to learn another truth, that kindness is not weakness, but a form of strength. Many of Finn's earliest encounters show him trying to understand the strange creatures he meets, even those that seem threatening. His instinct is not always to strike, but to listen. He believes that the world, even in its strangest forms, has a kind of order of possibility or friendship. When that fails, he does not hesitate to fight. But his first impulse tells us much about his inner philosophy. To Finn, the world is not divided into enemies and allies, but into beings who might still be understood. This gentle approach becomes even clearer when we consider his relationship with the Ice King. At first, Finn sees him as nothing more than a villain to be stopped. But as he grows older, he comes to recognize the loneliness hidden beneath the crown and the broken humanity that still lingers inside Simon Petrikov. Finn's childhood philosophy of innocence begins to open into something broader, a belief that people are not only what they appear to be, but also what they might have been or what they might still become. There is something deeply human of this. Many of us, when young, see the world in absolutes good and bad, right and wrong. Finn begins that way too, swinging his sword with all the certainty of a boy who believes in heroes. But even as a child, he shows glimpses of a deeper understanding, a willingness to question, to see more than the surface. His philosophy becomes a mirror of humanity's own journey, from simplicity into nuance, from clarity into compassion. It is worth remembering that Finn's story begins in the ruins of a world destroyed long before he was born. The Mushroom War reshaped the Earth into Ooo, scattering fragments of the old world into the new. And so Finn's childhood is not only a personal story, but also a symbolic one. He represents the resilience of humanity, the idea that even in the ashes of catastrophe, life can begin again. His laughter, his innocence, his eagerness to help others, all stand as quiet rebukes to the despair that ended the age of humor. In Finn, philosophy and history intertwine. He is both a child of the present and a reminder of what was lost. This is why Finn's philosophy matters so. It is not simply about being brave or kind. It is about proving that humanity can endure even in the strangest, most magical of lands. His existence asks the question, what does it mean to be human when there are no others left? And his answer, given not through speeches but through action, is that humanity lives on through the choices we make. Even as a boy, Finn carries himself with a sense of destiny, though not the grand cosmic destiny that so many characters in Ooo wrestle with. His destiny is simpler and perhaps more profound, to be himself, to live honestly, and to defend what he loved. This is the heart of his philosophy, shaped in the fires of a childhood unlike any other, yet deeply relatable to us all. And so, as the Child of Ooo, Finn shows us that philosophy can be born from innocence, from loneliness, and from the quiet determination to keep going. His story whispers that even when the world feels unfamiliar, we can still find meaning, we can still find love, and we can still be human. Finn's earliest adventures may seem lighthearted on the surface, chasing after bandits, rescuing princesses, and battling strange creatures in forests and dungeons. Yet beneath that playfulness lies something deeper, a quiet shaping of philosophy through action. For Finn, each quest was never just about treasure or glory. They were lessons, written not in books, but in experience. Think of how a child learns about the world. Often, it is not through abstract ideas, but through touching, tasting, falling, and getting back up. For Finn, the land of Ooo was his classroom. When he fought a monster, he learned not just how to swing a sword, but how to stand his ground against fear. When he encountered magical beings, he learned not only about their powers, but about patient respect. Each day built on the last, forming a worldview that was both simple and profound. What makes this especially fascinating is the contrast between Finn and so many of Oo's other heroes. Marceline carried centuries of memory. Princess Bubblegum wielded knowledge and science. The Ice King bore the burden of a cursed crown. But Finn, with no long history and no magical tool, faced the world with nothing but a wooden sword in his heart. His philosophy grew not from burden, but from possibility, not from ancient curses, but from fresh eyes. We see this most clearly in how Finn approaches danger. Where many would hesitate, Finn runs forward. Some call this recklessness, but in truth, it is a philosophy of faith. Faith that the world, even in its chaos, can be faced. Faith that when he leaps into the unknown, he will find a way through. For Finn, fear is not a signal to stop, but a reminder of why courage matters. And this quiet courage, born of trust in himself and in life, becomes a foundation that never leaves him. Even as a boy, Finn's innocence gave him an unusual kind of wisdom. He believed wholeheartedly that wrongs could be righted and that no one was beyond redemption. This belief, though often challenged, remained one of his guiding stars. When he faced villains, he did not only see threats, he saw beings caught in their own struggle, beings who might one day change. This is why, even in his youngest years, Finn's philosophy leaned not toward destruction, but toward healing. He swung his sword to defend, never to dominate. Of course, this philosophy did not grow in isolation. His bond with Jake shaped him more than any other influence. Jake's carefree spirit balanced Finn's seriousness, teaching him that even heroes must know how to rest and laugh. Through Jake, Finn learned that life's philosophy does not always emerge in moments of great battle, but also in quiet times, singing together, cooking noodles, or lying in the grass. To Finn, joy itself became part of the mission. Protecting the world was not just about defeating evil. It was about creating space for peace, music, and play. But there is another layer here, one that gives Finn's childhood philosophy its depth. Growing up as the only human meant that Finn always lived with questions about who he was and where he came from. These questions could have filled him with bitterness or despair. Instead, they gave him curiosity. Rather than lamenting what he did not have, Finn turned outward, asking what he could discover. In this way, his philosophy mirrors a truth often found in wisdom tradition, that identity is not fixed by what is missing, but shaped by what we seek. The ruins of the old world whispered to him, though he did not yet fully understand them. Broken machines, scattered relics, and quiet landscapes, scarred by the Mushroom War, were part of the background of his childhood. While others might have seen these ruins as reminders of loss, Finn saw them as part of the adventure. His philosophy treated even decay as something to explore. In a sense, he was learning without realizing it that endings and beginnings are woven together, and that from ruin can come wonder. And when we think of Finn's philosophy as a child, we must not forget his boundless empathy. Even as he trained himself to be a warrior, he remained sensitive to the feelings of others. This empathy often guided his decisions more than strategy ever did. If someone was hurting, Finn wanted to help. If someone was lonely, he wanted to be their friend. His sword may have defended kingdom, but it was his heart that built connections. And in a world shaped by fragmentation, that heart became a quiet force of unity. It is striking to realize how much of this philosophy was forged before Finn ever knew of his human origins in detail. He did not need knowledge of his lineage to become who he was. Instead, his philosophy of kindness, courage, and curiosity grew naturally out of the life he was given. Perhaps this is the essence of Finn's early philosophy, that one does not need to know the grand story to live well in the moment. Meaning is not found only in destiny or history, but in how one chooses to treat others today. As Finn began to grow older, these philosophies did not vanish, but matured. His innocence was tested, his compassion sometimes betrayed. But the core of his childhood spirit remained. And it is here, in this early stage, that we see the foundation for all that comes later. Before the heartbreaks, before the cosmic battles, before the revelations about his family, Finn was simply a child of Ooo. And in his childhood, he carried a philosophy that was as bright as the morning sun, that to live is to explore, to protect, and to love without hesitation. And so, sleepyheads, we can see how the Child of Ooo was already more than just a boy with a sword. He was a symbol of resilience, innocence, and hope. His philosophy was not written in words or carved in stone. It was lived in every laugh, every leap, and every act of courage in the face of uncertainty. A philosophy that whispered, even in those earliest days, life is fragile, but it is beautiful, and it is worth every moment we are given. As Finn's childhood stretched forward, the rhythm of his philosophy deepened like the steady heartbeat of a story unfolding. Each encounter in the land of Ooo pressed gently against his spirit, testing and strengthening the way he saw the world. His sword may have grown sharper, but what truly mattered was how his vision grew clearer. Finn began to see that the world was not simply a stage for adventure, but a living, breathing place filled with beings who carried their own joys and sorrows. And in every corner of Ooo, he found an opportunity not only to fight, but to understand. The Candy Kingdom often became a backdrop for his earliest quests, a place where he rushed to the aid of Princess Bubblegum and her subjects. In those sugary streets, Finn learned that leadership was not about controlling others, but about protecting. Watching Bubblegum balance compassion and calculation gave him insight into another philosophy, that love is not only about feelings, but about responsibility. Even as a boy, he absorbed this truth, storing it quietly in his heart where it would guide him in ways he did not yet realize. Then there were the dungeons and forests where Finn faced the unexpected. Whether it was a shapeshifter hiding behind a mask or a creature driven wild by hunger, these adventures taught him that appearances could not always be trusted. Yet instead of becoming suspicious or closed off, Finn leaned into patience. His philosophy of innocence adapted, allowing him to face uncertainty without losing his openness. In this way, Finn carried something rare, the ability to walk through danger without letting danger harden his soul. It is easy to overlook just how extraordinary this is. In a post-apocalyptic world, one might expect humanity's last child to grow wary, to shield himself against the unknown. But Finn chose different. His philosophy was not survival at any cost, but living fully with laughter and trust. He believed that to be human was not to hide, but to engage, to greet the strange with wonder, to meet the dangerous with courage, and to meet the hurting with kindness. And this philosophy of childhood gave him a strength beyond muscle. When the lich whispered of nothingness, Finn's innocence became resistant. When loneliness threatened to swallow him, his belief in friendship became his anchor. He was not yet aware of the great battles that would define his future, but the seeds were already planted. Every smile, every playful quest, every act of courage was shaping the man he would become. His adoptive parents, Joshua and Margaret, offered him the stability of family, while Jake gave him companionship that was both comforting and challenging. From Joshua's gruff wisdom, Finn learned that protection sometimes requires toughness. From Margaret's quiet care, he learned that love is best shown through presence. And from Jake's carefree nature, he discovered the philosophy of balance, that life is not only about duty, but also about joy. Together, these influences wove into Finn a philosophy that was both grounded and free-spirited. It is worth pausing to imagine Finn at this stage, standing on a hill at sunset, sword in hand, the sky above him painted in the streaks of violet and gold. Around him stretches a world of ruins and wonders, a land haunted by the past, but vibrant with possibility. He does not yet understand the depth of his own significance, nor the weight of the adventures ahead. But in his stance, steady eyes, we see the beginnings of a philosophy that will shape not only his own destiny, but the destiny of all who walk beside him. The Child of Ooo teaches us that philosophy does not need to be spoken to be real. It can be lived through small acts, choosing to help a stranger, choosing to laugh with a friend, choosing to step forward when fear urges retreat. Finn's childhood philosophy is not complicated. It is built on three simple truths: that courage matters, that kindness heals, and that curiosity opens doors. And yet, from these truths arises a worldview vast enough to carry him into battles against gods and monsters. As he grew, these childhood lessons became the foundation of every challenge to come. His philosophy of innocence hardened into compassion. His philosophy of curiosity matured into wisdom. And his philosophy of courage blossomed into resilience. What began in the quiet corners of his early life became the guiding compass for his greatest trial. And so, when we look back on Finn's childhood, we are not only remembering the adventures of a boy with a sword, we are tracing the roots of a philosophy that defines what it means to be human in a world that has all but forgotten humanity. Finn reminds us that even when the past is lost, the essence of who we are can live on not in ruins or relics, but in the choices of a single heart. The Child of Ooo stands as a symbol, a reminder that beginnings matter, that the smallest acts of innocence can blossom into great philosophy, and that sometimes the truest wisdom comes not from age or power, but from the openness of a child who chooses to love the world, no matter how strange or broken it may be. As Finn stepped out of childhood and into his earliest years as an adventurer, the philosophy that had begun in innocence now faced its first great test. No longer just a child of Ooo, Finn was becoming something more, a hero. And in this stage of his life, we see the shaping of a philosophy built not only on kindness and curiosity, but on the responsibility of defending others. At the heart of Finn's philosophy of heroism lies a simple truth. He believed the world needed saving, and he believed it was his job to try. Not because anyone told him to, not because of prophecy or duty, but because he felt it was the right thing to do. His sword, once just a toy in the hands of a child, now became a symbol of his calling. And each time he raised it, he was declaring that he would stand between danger and those who could not stand for themselves. Early on, Finn's understanding of heroism was straightforward, almost childlike. Villains were bad, heroes were good, and if someone was in trouble, you rushed in to save them. These early adventures gave us the image of Finn as the brave knight, always eager to leap into action, always ready to face down monsters with little thought for his own safety. But beneath that eagerness was a deeper philosophy forming, one that would grow more complex as he matured. We can see this most clearly in the way he faced enemies like the Ice King. At first, Ice King was a clear villain in Finn's eyes, a kidnapper, a nuisance, someone who threatened the safety of princesses and kingdoms. To young Finn, heroism meant defeating the Ice King, returning the stolen princess, and celebrating victory. But over time, Finn's philosophy of heroism began to soften. He started to see that the world was not always so black and white. The Ice King was not simply evil. He was lonely, broken, and misunderstood. Finn's philosophy of heroism began to expand beyond fighting toward healing. This marks an important step in his calling. For Finn, being a hero was not just about stopping bad things from happening. It was about helping others find a way back to themselves. This shift in thinking reveals a deeper layer to his philosophy. The true heroism is not about glory, but about empathy. To be a hero is to understand, to reach out, and to care even for those who seem lost. Of course, not every adventure allowed for such compassion. Ooo was a dangerous land, filled with threats that could not always be reasoned. The Lich, with his whispers of death and nothingness, embodied the kind of evil that could not be softened by empathy alone. Against such darkness, Finn's philosophy of heroism hardened into resilience. When compassion failed, courage became his weapon. And even then, his heroism was never about destruction for its own sake. It was about protection, about defending life against those forces that sought to erase it. Through all of this, Finn's bond with Jake remained central. Together, they created a balance that shaped Finn's approach to heroism. Jake often approached danger with humor or reluctance, preferring comfort over conflict. Finn, by contrast, ran headlong into danger with fearless conviction. Between the two, a philosophy of balance emerged. Heroism, Finn began to learn, was not only about fighting monsters. It was also about knowing when to rest, when to laugh, and when to lean on others. As Finn grew older, he also began to reflect on what it meant to call oneself a hero. Was it simply about defeating villains? Was it about protecting kingdoms? Or was it something quieter, something rooted in the everyday choices of kindness and courage? His adventures gave him glimpses of each answer, and his philosophy grew from those glimpses, adapting and changing as he matured. And perhaps this is the most human part of his calling. Unlike legendary figures bound by destiny, Finn's philosophy of heroism was never fixed. It evolved with him, shaped by mistakes, by victories, and by the quiet lessons learned in the spaces between battles. Each time he stumbled, he grew. Each time he failed, he reflected. And each time he triumphed, he did so not with arrogance, but with gratitude. At this stage, Finn was still young, still learning. Yet even then, we can see the seeds of the philosophy that would carry him through his greatest trial. A belief that heroism is not about power, but about responsibility. The compassion is as important as courage, and that to be a hero is not to stand apart from others, but to stand with them. Finn's calling as a hero often appeared brightest when others tried to define what heroism should look like. In the land of Ooo, there was no shortage of figures who claimed authority, who carried crowns, thrones, or titles. Yet Finn, with no royal blood, no cosmic power, and no ancient lineage, stood among them as a self-made guardian. His philosophy was shaped by this independence. To Finn, being a hero was never about titles or recognition. It was about doing the right thing, even when no one was watching, even when there was no reward waiting at the end. We see this clearly in the countless times Finn responded to cries for help that others would have ignored. A village under threat, a lonely creature in need, even a kingdom made of candy. To him, no problem was too small. He treated every call for aid as if it mattered, because in his eyes, it did. His philosophy of heroism was not about scale, it was about sincerity. A hero, Finn believed, is measured not by how grand the battle, but by how willingly one steps forward when someone else needs help. And yet, his path was not free from stakes. Finn sometimes rushed into situations without thinking, driven by the same boldness that made him so courageous. There were times when his desire to save others caused unintended harm. But instead of letting those failures harden him, Finn turned them into lessons. His philosophy embraced the idea that mistakes are part of the journey, that imperfection does not erase the value of trying. In this way, he revealed another truth about heroism. It is not about being flawless, but about learning, adjusting, and continuing forward with a sincere heart. This ability to learn shaped Finn in ways that made his philosophy richer. For instance, when he first encountered Flame Princess, his instinct was to protect and to love. Yet he soon discovered that her fire, both literal and emotional, could burn. Their relationship challenged him to see that love and heroism are not always simple. That protecting someone does not mean controlling them. Through these experiences, Finn's philosophy deepened. Heroism was not only about saving others, but about respecting their freedom and understanding their pain. And then there was the Lich, a being who stood in opposition to everything Finn believed in. Where Finn's philosophy celebrated life, the Lich embodied death. Where Finn cherished hope, the Lich preached nothingness. Facing him was more than a battle of swords and spells. It was a battle of worldview. Every time Finn stood against the Lich, he was reaffirming his philosophy, that existence itself is meaningful, that life is worth fighting for even in the face of cosmic despair. To be a hero in Finn's eyes was to stand defiantly for life, no matter how fragile. But not all challenges came from villains. Some came from within Finn's own heart. There were moments when he questioned whether he was truly strong enough, whether his actions really made a difference. In those moments, his philosophy turned inward. He began to understand that being a hero is not about certainty, but about persistence. Even when doubts clouded his mind, he chose to act, to keep moving, to keep believing that his efforts mattered. This resilience became a cornerstone of his philosophy, showing us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to keep going despite it. His adventures with Jake also refined his philosophy. Jake's relaxed attitude sometimes clashed with Finn's intensity, teaching him that not every situation required a sword. Some problems could be solved with patience, humor, or even simply walking away. At first, Finn resisted this idea, eager to leap into battle at every turn. But slowly he began to see the wisdom in it. Heroism was not only about action, but also about discernment, knowing when to fight and when to let things be. All of these experiences painted Finn's philosophy of heroism as something alive, constantly shifting as he grew. What began as simple bravery matured into empathy. What began as eagerness matured into patience. And what began as innocence matured into wisdom. Yet through all these changes, the core remained the same, a deep desire to protect, to help, and to stand for what is right. And so Finn's calling was never a single moment of destiny, but a series of choices, each one shaping the next. In every choice, his philosophy grew more layered, more thoughtful, more human. He was not a perfect hero, but he was a true one, and in his truth, we can see the philosophy of a boy becoming a man, and of a child of Ooo becoming its protector. As Finn's adventures stretched further across Ooo, the world began to test his philosophy with new layers of complexity. The land of Ooo was not only a place of dungeons and monsters, it was also a place of kingdom, politics, and beings whose motives could not be reduced to good or evil. And so Finn's simple desire to do the right thing began to grow into something more nuanced. His philosophy of heroism was no longer only about charging forward with his sword. It was about listening, reflecting, and understanding that right and wrong often existed in shades of gray. Princess Bubblegum played an important role in shaping this side of Finn's philosophy. At first, she was simply a princess to be rescued, a symbol of the fairy tale role Finn seemed destined to play. But as their relationship deepened, he began to see her complexity, her brilliance, her burdens as a leader, and even her flaws. Bubblegum often made decisions rooted in practicality, even at the cost of compassion. Finn, by contrast, leaned toward empathy, often questioning whether her choices were just. Their interactions forced him to wrestle with the reality that being a hero sometimes means standing apart from authority, and that authority comes from someone you admire. This tension revealed another layer of his philosophy. To Finn, heroism was not about blind loyalty. It was about conscience. He was willing to defy kings, wizards, even friends, if it meant staying true to what he believed was right. This independence made his philosophy unique in Ooo. where so many characters were bound by tradition, power, or fear. Finn's guiding compass was not external. It was his own heart, steady and sincere. And yet Ooo did not make it easy. There were times when Finn's attempts at heroism were misunderstood, times when his interventions made matters worse, times when the very people he sought to protect turned against him. But rather than abandoning his calling, Finn allowed these moments to refine him. His philosophy absorbed the truth that not every heroic act would be celebrated, and not every outcome would be perfect. Still, he chose to act. Still, he chose to care. This persistence, this refusal to let failure silence him, became one of the deepest parts of his philosophy. Consider his relationship with Marceline. At first, she was a trickster and rival, someone who tested Finn's resolve in playful, sometimes dangerous ways. But over time, she became one of his closest friends. Through Marceline, Finn learned that people are rarely what they seem at first glance, and that heroism often involves patience and forgiveness. She was not a villain to be defeated, but a soul with her own scars. By choosing to trust her, Finn revealed that his philosophy of heroism was rooted not only in protection, but in transformation, the belief that people can change and that friendship can grow in unexpected places. Another test came in the form of cosmic forces. The battles against creatures like Orgalor, or the trials within alternate dimensions, stretched Finn's philosophy beyond the ordinary. He was forced to realize that heroism was not only about defending villages and kingdoms, but about standing against powers that could reshape reality itself. And yet, even in these vast struggles, his philosophy did not drift toward grandeur. He never saw himself as chosen or destined. He saw himself simply as someone who could not ignore the call to protect. That humility gave his philosophy a grounding, a reminder that true heroism is not about scale, but about sincerity. These experiences also revealed Finn's growth in understanding consequence. As a child, he had believed that good would always triumph if he tried hard enough. As a hero, he began to see that victories sometimes came at a cost. He saw friendships strained, lands scarred, and lives forever changed by choices made in the heat of battle. Instead of letting this harden him into cynicism, Finn allowed it to shape his philosophy into something more resilient. He accepted that pain was part of heroism, but he also believed that the presence of pain did not diminish the value of trying. And perhaps this is what makes Finn's philosophy so human. Many of the beings in Ooo carried perspective, shaped by centuries of experience or by elemental nature. Finn's philosophy, however, was shaped by growth, by the process of learning, stumbling, and getting back up again. His heroism was never static. It was alive, evolving as he did, reflecting not the certainty of destiny, but the journey of becoming. So when we speak of Finn's calling, we are not speaking of a single moment when he became a hero. We are speaking of 1,000 small choices, each one deepening his philosophy, to step forward when others held back, to listen when others dismissed, to forgive when others condemned. These choices, repeated across the landscapes of Ooo, became the rhythm of his life and the essence of his philosophy of heroism. As Finn's legend grew across the land of Ooo, so too did the weight of his calling. No longer was he simply the boy with a wooden sword who rushed into danger with unshakable optimism. He was becoming the protector of kingdoms, the defender of friends, the one whose name echoed in stories told by those he saved. And with that recognition came new challenges, for fame often tempts the ego. Yet Finn's philosophy of heroism remained remarkably humble. He never sought to rule or to claim glory for himself. In his eyes, the truest victories were not trophies, but the safety and happiness of others. We see this humility most clearly in the way Finn approached success. After defeating powerful enemies, after saving lands that should have been beyond his reach, he rarely paused to celebrate his own achievements. Instead, his first concern was whether those around him were safe, whether peace had truly been restored. This reveals the essence of his philosophy, that heroism is not about standing above others, but about standing beside them. A hero's joy for Finn came from knowing that life could go on, that people could laugh again, that the world was still turning despite its danger. But with time, Finn also learned that heroism demanded sacrifice. There were moments when he had to let go of what he wanted in order to protect what others needed. Times when he placed himself in danger without expecting anyone to thank him. In these sacrifices, his philosophy grew deeper. He came to understand that heroism is not about ease or reward, but about responsibility, the quiet, often unseen responsibility to carry burdens so that others might be free of them. This responsibility became even clearer as Finn's battles grew larger, sometimes spanning realities themselves. Against cosmic beings like the Lich, his philosophy revealed its full strength. Though Finn was just a human boy, fragile and mortal, he never faltered in his belief that standing against destruction mattered. His courage in these moments was not rooted in certainty of victory, but in the refusal to yield. To Finn, being a hero did not mean winning every battle. It meant choosing to fight for life, even when the odds seemed impossible. His resilience became a core of his philosophy, showing that heroism is not defined by outcome, but by intention. Yet even as his calling expanded into these grand struggles, Finn never lost sight of the smaller acts of kindness. He continued to help those who were overlooked, the small creatures, the lonely wanderer, the outcasts who had no one else to defend them. To Finn, these moments were just as important as battles against kings and monsters. His philosophy told him that every life, no matter how small, had value. In this way, he carried a balance that many older heroes had lost. He could stand against cosmic threats one day and then stop to comfort a single crying soul the next. Both acts, in his eye, were equally heroic. And through it all, Finn's humanity remained his anchor. Surrounded by beings of immense power and ancient wisdom, Finn reminded the world that being human was not a weakness, but a strength. His mortality gave his philosophy urgency. His fragility gave his courage weight. Every act of bravery mattered because it could have been his last. And perhaps this is why his philosophy resonates so deeply, because it shows us that heroism is not about being invincible, but about choosing to care even when we are breakable. In time, Finn began to reflect on what heroism meant beyond the battle. He wondered what it meant to live as a hero, not just to fight as one. This reflection opened the door to questions of love, of loss, and of the deeper responsibilities that come with connection. For if being a hero meant protecting others, then it also meant learning how to let them go, how to respect their choices, and how to grow alongside them. His calling was no longer just about swords and quests, but about the subtler philosophy of relationships and the heart. And so, as Finn's story carried him further from childhood, his philosophy of heroism revealed its fullest form. It was not bound by destiny, not defined by power, not dependent on victory. It was shaped by empathy, courage, humility, and resilience. A philosophy that told him time and again to step forward when others could not. This is the heart of Finn's calling. To be a hero not because he must, but because he chooses to. To believe that life is worth protecting, no matter the cost. And to carry that belief quietly, without need for reward, without need for recognition. In this way, Finn became not only the last human of Ooo, but the embodiment of a philosophy that speaks to the deepest part of what it means to be human. As this chapter of his philosophy settles into quiet reflection, we can feel the next one already stirring. For beyond battles and responsibilities lies another realm of challenge, the realm of the heart. Finn's journey of heroism would soon intertwine with his journey of love, and through love, he would discover new dimensions of what it means to let go, to accept change, and to grow. And so, the boy who once charged into danger with a wooden sword now steps toward an even greater test, the test of the heart, where his philosophy will be stretched by longing, heartbreak, and the wisdom of letting go. As Finn grew older, the sword at his side was no longer the only weight he carried. His heart, once filled only with innocence and adventure, began to encounter something new, the pull of love. For many, love feels like a sudden spark, a rush that changes everything. For Finn, it became both a gift and a challenge, a gentle teacher and a relentless test. Through love, his philosophy was stretched, reshaped, and deepened in ways that no battle ever could. His earliest feelings bloomed toward Princess Bubblegum. She was older, wiser, and to Finn's young eyes, she seemed like the perfect reflection of what a hero's partner should be. She was brilliant, kind, and carried a grace that dazzled. Yet from the start, their connection revealed the truth that love is not always symmetrical. Bubblegum cared deeply for Finn, but not in the way he longed for. Her responsibilities as ruler of the Candy Kingdom kept her heart tethered elsewhere, to duties larger than any one person. For Finn, this was the first lesson, that love cannot be forced to fit the shape we wish it to take. This realization did not come easily. Finn wrestled with rejection, with the sting of knowing that his heart's desire might never be returned in the way he dreamed. But instead of letting this harden him, his philosophy began to evolve. He learned that part of loving someone means accepting who they are and the life they choose, even if it leads them away from it. In this way, his philosophy of heroism flowed into his philosophy of love. Just as he defended kingdoms without expecting reward, so too did he learn to love without expecting possession. Later came Flame Princess, a relationship that carried fire in every sense of the word. At first, their bond burned brightly, filled with energy and excitement. For a time, it seemed as though Finn had found someone whose spirit matched his own, someone equally wild, equally vibrant. Yet the flames that warmed him also scorched. Their love became a reminder that passion alone cannot sustain a bond. Finn's mistakes in this relationship, his moments of dishonesty, his attempts to control what he could not reveal to him, another truth, that love demands honesty, trust, and the humility to step back when needed. Though their time together ended painfully, Flame Princess gave Finn one of the most important lessons of his life. He realized that love is not about bending someone else's nature to suit your own, but about respecting who they are in their fullness, even if it means letting them go. This realization did not erase the hurt, but it planted in Finn a philosophy of love rooted in freedom. To love truly is to allow another to be themselves, even when it means standing apart. Huntress Wizard, too, offered her own quiet lesson. Their bond was never as dramatic a fiery romance with Flame Princess, nor as bittersweet as his longing for bubblegum. Instead, it was steady, calm, and reflective. With her, Finn discovered a form of connection that did not require intensity or possession, but rather presence. Their relationship was more about companionship, shared understanding, and the subtle joys of simply existing together. Through her, Finn's philosophy matured even further. He began to see that love is not always about grand declarations, but about the quiet acceptance of two lives moving side by side. Each of these relationships left an imprint, shaping Finn's philosophy of love into something layered and complex. He moved from the yearning of first crushes to the passion of fiery romance, to the wisdom of calmer companionship. At every stage, he learned that love is not static. It changes just as people change. And the philosophy that guided him through battles now guided him through the shifting landscape of the heart, to act with sincerity, to accept impermanence, and to let go with grace when the time comes. This evolution is deeply human. Love, like heroism, often begins with ideals, visions of perfection, of storybook ending. But as we grow, we learn that real love is messier, more fragile, and yet more beautiful because of its imperfections. Finn's philosophy embraced this truth. He understood through joy and through heartbreak that love's power lies not in permanence, but in the way it transforms us while it lasts. And so Finn's journey through love reveals a philosophy of letting go, not with bitterness, but with gratitude. Each person he cared for gave him something to carry forward, something that shaped the way he saw himself and the world. And even when love ended, it left him stronger, softer, and more human than before. Love's lessons often arrive not in the grand moments, but in the quiet spaces afterward, in the silences, in the long walks alone, in the way the heart slowly teaches itself to beat differently. For Finn, every love that came and went left behind echoes, and in those echoes his philosophy deepened. When Bubblegum stepped back from him, choosing the responsibilities of her kingdom over the simplicity of affection, Finn discovered what it meant to admire someone from a distance. He could not change her path, nor should he. To love her was to understand that her story stretched in directions his own could not follow. This was the earliest taste of impermanence. the truth that not all bonds are meant to grow in the way we hope. And though it hurt, Finn did not allow bitterness to poison his spirit. His philosophy turned the pain into gentleness, teaching him to honor what was given instead of clinging to what could not be. Flame Princess, by contrast, taught him about the danger of holding too tightly. Their bond burned with such intensity that it consumed itself. Finn's attempts to shape her choices, to push her into a role he imagined, cracked the foundation of trust between them. In losing her, Finn saw that love is not a prize to be won, nor a flame to be controlled. It is a living thing, one that cannot survive if forced. And so his philosophy gained another strand, that love thrives only in freedom, and that true care means stepping back as often as stepping forward. Hunter's Wizard's presence in his life added yet another layer. With her, there was no dramatic rise or fall, no desperate chase, no heartbreak that shattered him. Instead, there was balance. Their time together whispered that love does not always have to be overwhelming. Sometimes it can be steady, measured, like two travelers sharing the same path for a while. This relationship helped Finn to see that love's value is not only in its passion, but also in its serenity. And in that calm, his philosophy grew still more mature, recognizing that companionship itself can be a profound form of love. All of these experiences, woven together, gave Finn something rare, perspective. Where once he saw love as a quest to be fulfilled, like the rescue of a princess from a tower, he now saw it as a journey without guarantees. He came to accept that the heart's desires cannot always be met in the way we imagine, and that this does not make them any less meaningful. His philosophy of love began to mirror the philosophies of ancient wisdom, that everything changes, that nothing can be held forever, and that the beauty of life lies in its fleetingness. This is why Finn's story resonates so deeply with us. We too carry the marks of loves that came and went, of connections that changed us even as they faded. And just like Finn, we must learn to hold those memories not with regret, but with gratitude. His philosophy of letting go reminds us that endings are not failure. They are part of the rhythm of being alive. And yet, for all the pain and all the change, Finn's heart never closed. This, perhaps, is the most remarkable part of his philosophy. Though he was rejected, though he was burned, though he was left to walk alone, he never let those experiences turn him away from love. He remained open, willing to try again, willing to believe again. His heart did not become harder with each loss. It became softer, wiser, and more compassionate. That openness is heroic in its own way. To face monsters with a sword is one kind of courage. To keep your heart open, even after it has been broken, is another. And Finn, with the same resilience he brought to every battle, brought that resilience to his heart. He understood that love, even when it ends, is always worth the risk. As the years in Ooo unfolded, Finn's understanding of love became less about chasing the ideal and more about listening to what each moment had to teach him. No longer the boy who mistook affection for destiny, he grew into someone who could step back and reflect, who could hold both joy and sorrow without letting either define him completely. His philosophy of love, once a hopeful flame burning brightly, was now becoming a steady lantern, guiding him through the shifting seasons of the heart. One of the quietest but most profound lessons came not from his romances, but from his friendships. Finn learned that the boundaries between love and friendship are not always rigid. With characters like Marceline and Bubblegum, his affection moved beyond labels, becoming something larger, more enduring. In them, he discovered that love can take many forms, that it is not confined to romance, nor bound by expectation. His philosophy began to see love as a spectrum of care, trust, and connection, each bond unique and each one valuable. When he reflected on his past with Bubblegum, the sting of unrequited love transformed into respect and admiration. He no longer sought to claim her heart, but instead treasured the bond they shared as allies and as friends. This was one of the purest signs of his growth, the ability to release longing without losing affection. His philosophy here aligned with one of the oldest truths, that love is not ownership, but recognition. To love someone is to honor their path, even if it diverges from your own. With Flame Prince, the lesson was harder, sharper. Their breakup left scars that took time to heal. Yet in those scars, Finn found resilience. He came to see that love's end does not diminish what was real in the beginning. The fire that once burned too brightly became, in memory, a light that warmed him during its time. Through this, his philosophy absorbed a lesson often whispered in ancient tradition, that every flame has its season, and when it fades, we must not curse the darkness, but thank the light for having burned at all. Huntress Wizard offered a different kind of wisdom. Their bond never demanded permanence, nor did it try to define itself in rigid terms. It existed simply, like a song shared between two travelers under the stars. In this, Finn learned that love can be present without being forever, meaningful without being bound. His philosophy began to understand that transience does not weaken love, it gives it poignance. The brevity of their connection made it no less true, but perhaps even more precious, because of its fleeting nature. These threads of experience wove together into a tapestry of understanding. Finn's philosophy of love became one of impermanence, of gratitude, and of freedom. He came to believe that love is less about holding on tightly and more about appreciating what is given when it is given. His relationships taught him that every connection changes, and that the value of love lies not in how long it lasts, but in how deeply it shapes who we are. This philosophy also gave Finn a rare kind of peace. Where others might grow bitter after heartbreak, Finn chose openness. He did not close himself off, nor did he dwell endlessly on what might have been. Instead, he let his heart remain alive to possibility, alive to the chance of new connections, alive to the truth that love in all its forms is part of what makes life worth living. And in this way, his philosophy of love mirrors his philosophy of heroism. Just as he stood against monsters even when he knew he might fail, he continued to open his heart even when he knew it might break. In both, the courage lay not in the guarantee of success, but in the willingness to try. To Finn, to love was as heroic as to fight both acts of faith, both affirmations that life is worth the risk. When we look at Finn's journey of love, we see not a series of failures, but a series of lessons, each one building upon the last. His philosophy reveals that loss does not erase meaning, that heartbreak does not erase beauty, and that endings do not erase beginning. Everything is carried forward, each bond leaving behind a piece of itself in the shape of who we become. And so the boy who once believed that love was about saving princesses and winning their hearts now understands that love is about freedom, respect, and growth. It is about letting go when the time comes, without bitterness and with gratitude for what was shared. This is the wisdom of love and letting go, a wisdom that matured alongside Finn as he walked through the labyrinth of the heart. As Finn's heart settled into the rhythm of maturity, love no longer appeared to him as a finish line or a prize to be claimed. It became instead a practice, a way of seeing others, of seeing himself, and of accepting the changes that life constantly unfolds. His early crushes, fiery romance, and fleeting bonds had all carried him through storms of joy and sorrow, and now, in the quiet after those storms, his philosophy of love revealed its true shape. He began to see love as a mirror. Each person he cared for reflected something different back at him: his innocence, his passion, his mistakes, his capacity for gentleness. Bubblegum reflected his longing for guidance and admiration. Flame Princess reflected his struggles with control and honesty. Hunter's Wizard reflected his ability to find peace in simple companionship. Together, these reflections helped Finn to understand himself, and through that understanding, to grow. Love was no longer about seeking validation from others. It was about discovering the truths that only intimacy can uncover. This philosophy gave Finn a resilience that extended beyond romance. When friendships shifted, when allies drifted away, when bonds changed shape, he did not see those changes as failures. He saw them as transformation. His ability to let go gracefully allowed him to remain connected without clinging, to honor the past while stepping forward into the future. This is one of the deepest lessons of his philosophy, that love is not lost when it ends. It simply takes a new form in memory and growth, in the ways it continues to live within us. Even in heartbreak, Finn's openness never faltered. There were moments when his heart was bruised, when loneliness crept in, when he wondered if love was meant for him at all. Yet he never allowed those doubts to close the door entirely. Instead, he carried them with gentleness, like scars that no longer hurt, but still remind him of the battles fought. He understood that to risk love again was not foolishness, but bravery. This willingness to remain vulnerable was itself an act of heroism, perhaps even greater than any battle he fought with a sword. The philosophy of love and letting go also deepened Finn's understanding of impermanence. He had always lived in a world shaped by change, a world born from the ruins of the Mushroom War, where kingdoms rose and fell, and where even the strongest beings could crumble. Through love, he came to see that impermanence was not only a feature of the world outside him, but also of the world within him. His heart, too, would change, and instead of resisting this truth, he welcomed it. By embracing impermanence, he freed himself from despair, allowing each chapter of his life to close with gratitude rather than regret. This acceptance of change gave him a kind of peace. He no longer sought to grasp tightly to what he had, nor did he chase endlessly after what he lacked. His philosophy taught him to meet each connection as it came, to hold it while it lasted, and to release it when it was time. In this way, love became less about possession and more about presence. To love for Finn was simply to be fully there in laughter, in struggle, in silence, knowing that the moment itself was enough. And so Finn's story of love is not one of triumphs or failures, but of transformation, from longing to acceptance, from heartbreak to wisdom, from holding on to letting go. Each relationship added depth to his philosophy, carrying him further along the path of becoming not just the hero of Ooo, but a human being with a heart both fragile and strong. In many ways, Finn's philosophy of love mirrors the philosophy of life itself. Both are impermanent. Both demand courage. Both are filled with beginnings and endings, with joy and sorrow. And both remind us that what matters is not how long something lasts, but how deeply it is lived. Finn teaches us that to love is to risk, to lose, and to grow, and that in letting go, we do not diminish what was, but carry it forward as part of who we are. To understand Finn's philosophy, we must look at the moments when his humanity stood in sharp contrast to the world around him. For Ooo was never a gentle place. It was a land born from catastrophe, filled with beings whose powers stretched across centuries, dimensions, and even reality. Vampires who could drain the lifeblood of kingdoms, cosmic entities who could unmake entire worlds, and monsters whose very presence carried whispers of the void. Among them walked Finn, mortal, fragile, bound to time. And yet, it was in this contrast that his philosophy revealed some of its deepest truths. For Finn, being human was never a weakness to be pitied. It was a grounding. Where Marceline carried the weight of immortality, Finn carried the fleeting nature of life. Where the Ice King was chained to a crown's curse, Finn was free to shape his choices. Where beings like the Lich sought to erase existence itself, Finn stood as a reminder of why existence mattered. His mortality gave his philosophy urgency. Every battle, every choice carried meaning because his time was limited. He fought not because he could endure forever, but because he could not, and that impermanence gave each act its power. Perhaps the most profound test of his philosophy came when he faced the Lich. This ancient force of death embodied the very opposite of Finn's worldview. The Lich did not seek conquest or rule. He sought nothing, the undoing of all things. Against such despair, Finn's sword seemed almost laughably small. But philosophy is not measured in strength of arm. It is measured in strength of spirit. And Finn's spirit refused to yield. Each time he faced the Lich, he reaffirmed his belief that life, however fragile, was still worth protecting. His humanity became his defiance. Where the Lich whispered of endings, Finn answered with the beginning. In those moments, his philosophy grew sharper. He came to understand that heroism was not only about saving others from monsters, but about standing as a symbol of resilience in the face of overwhelming darkness. His very existence, a single human in a world of beings far beyond him, became a quiet resistance to despair. Finn's philosophy whispered that even one fragile life can stand against the void, and in doing so, remind the world of its own meaning. The encounters with Golb added yet another layer. Golb was not evil in the way villains often are. Golb was chaos incarnate, a force that existed beyond morality, beyond reason. To face Golb was to confront the raw uncertainty of existence itself, the truth that not everything can be explained or defeated. For many, such a realization might inspire fear or paralysis, but for Finn, it inspired acceptance. His philosophy bent, but it did not break. He understood that even in a world where chaos reigns, one can still choose to live with courage and kindness. What makes this so remarkable is that Finn did not meet these cosmic forces with arrogance. He did not claim to be their equal. He faced them knowing full well that he was smaller, weaker, and more fragile. And yet he also knew that being human was its own kind of strength. His heart could love, his mind could grow, his spirit could adapt. These were not the powers of gods, but they were powers nonetheless. And in many ways, they were the most important. Even in his encounters with more earthly monsters, Finn's philosophy shone through. He treated his battles not only as tests of strength, but as chances to learn. Some monsters, once defeated, revealed themselves not as villains, but as lost or misunderstood beings. In those moments, Finn's philosophy leaned toward empathy, showing us that to be human is to see beyond appearances, to search for the story behind the mask. Other monsters, truly destructive in nature, demanded that he fight with all his courage. In those moments, Finn's humanity revealed itself as determination, the refusal to give up, even when the odds seemed impossible. Through all of this, Finn began to see his humanity not as something separate from the monsters of Ooo, but as something that coexisted with them. He realized that everyone, human or not, carried both light and shadow within them. His philosophy grew into one of balance, to acknowledge the darkness without being consumed by it, and to nurture the light even when it flickered. This balance became a cornerstone of his identity, a way of being human among monsters without losing him. When Finn finally encountered others of his kind human, who had survived in hidden corners of the world, his philosophy was tested in a new way. For so long, he had carried the quiet belief that he was alone, the last spark of humanity flickering in Ooo. To suddenly find that he was not the only one was both a gift and a burden. Meeting Susan, with her complicated past and her half-forgotten identity, reminded him that being human was not a single story, but a spectrum of experience. Susan's journey of memory and rediscovery taught Finn that humanity is fragile, shaped by choices and by forces outside our control. She had been altered, her past clouded by secrets, her body and mind marked by the experiments of others. And yet, beneath all of that, she remained human in the truest sense, capable of love, loyalty, and growth. Finn's philosophy embraced this truth, that humanity is not measured by purity or perfection, but by the heart that endures despite hardship. In Susan, he saw that even when broken, people can heal. Even when altered, they remain themselves. Then came his mother, Minerva, hidden away in the safety of a digital world where she could protect the remnants of their people. For Finn, this reunion was both joyous and difficult. To finally meet the woman who had given him life was to step into a story he had long yearned to understand. Yet Minerva's philosophy was so different from his own. She believed in safety, in control, in shielding humanity from the chaos of Ooo by retreating into isolation. Her desire to protect came from love, but it was a love shaped by fear. Finn's philosophy, however, had been forged in the wild. He believed that to live fully was to face danger, to explore, to risk heartbreak and loss. Where Minerva sought permanence through safety, Finn sought meaning through experience. Their difference revealed a profound truth about being human, that we are shaped not only by who we are, but by the worlds we inhabit. Finn had grown among monsters, among gods, among chaos, and this had given him a philosophy of openness. His mother, separated from that chaos, had grown cautious and protective. This meeting forced Finn to reflect on what it meant to be human. Oh, was it better to preserve life at all costs, even if it meant never truly living? Or was it better to step into the uncertain, knowing that risk and pain were part of what made life meaningful? For Finn, the answer was clear. His philosophy of humanity was not about surviving forever. It was about embracing the fleeting nature of existence and choosing to live with courage and love in the time given. Even in the face of his mother's hesitation, Finn did not reject her. His philosophy did not demand absolute agreement. Instead, it allowed him to understand her choices, to respect the love that shaped them, even as he chose a different path. This ability to hold space for a difference to love without needing to erase or control marked another step in his growth. It showed that to be human among monsters also meant to be human among other humans, to recognize that there is no single way to live, no single philosophy that defines us all. Through Susan and Minerva, Finn's humanity became clearer to himself. He was not defined by being the last, nor by being the strongest, but by being willing to meet the world as it was. His philosophy told him that humanity was not an inheritance of blood alone. It was a practice of compassion, of resilience, of courage. And in practicing it, he carried forward not only his own story, but the story of all who came before him. Standing among gods, monsters, and the ruins of civilizations, Finn came to see that being human was not a limitation, but a form of balance. He was mortal, but this gave his actions weight. He was small, but this gave his choices meaning. He was fragile, but this gave his compassion depth. To be human among monsters was to remind the world that life, however brief, is still a gift. Finn's philosophy of being human was tested most fiercely not in quiet moments with family, but in the storms of cosmic chaos. The land of Ooo was never free from the touch of the vast and unknowable, and Finn often found himself standing before forces that dwarfed him in power and scope. Yet it was precisely in these encounters that the depth of his humanity shone most clearly. Orgalorg, the ancient cosmic entity reborn in the form of Gunter, carried within him the hunger of destruction. To witness such a creature was to see the enormity of power stripped of morality, the weight of the universe pressing against the fragile earth. And yet Finn did not cower. He approached Orgalorg not as a god or a conqueror might, but as a human, fallible, breakable, and but brave. His philosophy told him that size and strength were not the measures of worth. Even the smallest hand could push back against the tide. Even the most fleeting life could leave ripples that mattered. Golb, however, was something else entirely. Golb was not simply destructive. He was entropy itself, a force of chaos so primal that it defied reason. Golb represented everything Finn could not understand, everything that lay beyond the boundaries of control. To face Golb was to confront the reality that some things cannot be defeated, only endured. And in that confrontation, Finn's philosophy deepened once more. He came to see that being human does not mean conquering all mystery, but living meaningfully within them. During the climactic confrontation, when Golb's presence threatened to unravel Ooo, Finn did not wield his sword as though he could strike down chaos itself. Instead, he leaned into compassion. He reached for song, for unity, for the reminder that even in the face of overwhelming destruction, people could come together. His philosophy in that moment was simple yet profound, that humanity survives not by mastering chaos, but by holding to one another in the midst of it. This moment echoes a truth that runs quietly throughout Finn's life, that the strength of humanity is not in standing alone, but in standing together. Though he was often called the last human, his actions revealed that his humanity was always entangled with others, with Jake, with Marceline, with Bubblegum, with Susan, and with the countless lives he touched. His philosophy was not about isolation. It was about connection, the invisible threads of care that bind fragile beings against the storms of eternity. What makes these encounters with monsters and cosmic beings so striking is not that Finn defeated them, but that he stood against them at all. He was never meant to be their equal. He was meant to be a reminder that life's value does not diminish simply because it is small. In fact, it is the brevity of life that gives it weight. For an immortal creature, one day may pass unnoticed. For Finn, one day could hold the laughter of a friend, the kindness of a stranger, the beauty of a sunrise. And in choosing to fight for those small moments, he revealed a philosophy larger than any spell or crown, that mortality itself is sacred. Even when facing the Lich's nihilism, Finn's philosophy offered a counterweight. The Lich saw life as pointless, fragile, destined for nothingness. Finn, by contrast, saw life as precious precisely because of its fragility. To him, the fact that everything ends does not erase meaning, it creates it. Each act of love, each act of courage, each choice to help instead of harm, is given power because it will not last forever. This inversion of the Lich's worldview shows the heart of Finn's humanity, that impermanence is not despair, but beauty. And so, whether among friends or among monsters, Finn carried this truth. His humanity was not something to be overcome. It was his strength. His philosophy taught him that he did not need to match the immortality of vampires, the genius of scientists, or the enormity of cosmic being. He needed only to be himself, present, compassionate, and willing to stand when it mattered. In a world of gods and monsters, that was enough. As Finn grew into his role, his humanity became less a question of difference and more a symbol of balance. The world around him was filled with extremes, beings who lived forever, who controlled elements, who sought absolute order or chaos. Finn, in contrast, lived in the middle. He could bleed, he could falter, he could fail. But this very imperfection made him a bridge between worlds. His philosophy reminded others that life is not about absolutes, but about finding harmony within contradiction. Consider his bond with Marceline. She was centuries old, carrying the scars of endless time. Yet in Finn's company, she could simply laugh, play music, and feel young again. His humanity reminded her of what she still carried within herself, despite her long years. With Princess Bubblegum, too, Finn's grounded nature often countered her pursuit of perfection and control. Where she sometimes leaned toward cold calculation, Finn's philosophy nudged her back toward compassion, toward seeing the people behind the science. Even with Jake, whose magical stretching power could have easily pulled him away from ordinary concerns, Finn's presence kept their adventures rooted in the simple joy of being brother. Again and again, his philosophy of being human among monsters softened the edges of those around him. He did not seek to control or to dominate them. He simply offered his presence, his honesty, and his willingness to face the world as it was. And in doing so, he reminded gods, monsters, and mortals alike of the quiet strength that comes from living fully in the moment. This role as a balancing force became even clearer during moments of great upheaval. When kingdoms clashed, when magic faltered, when the very fabric of Ooo seemed at risk, Finn's philosophy did not collapse under the weight. Instead, it steadied those around him. He did not claim to have the answers to every cosmic riddle, but he could say with a conviction that protecting each other mattered, that holding on to kindness mattered, that even in the darkest hour it was worth reaching for hope. What is striking is that Finn never allowed himself to believe that being human made him lesser. He never longed to trade his mortality for immortality, his fragility for invincibility. He knew that his humanity was not an obstacle but a truth. It gave him the ability to feel deeply, to treasure fleeting joys, to change and grow in ways immortal beings often could not. His philosophy taught him that to be human is to be unfinished, always learning, always becoming, always capable of renewal. In this way, Finn's story carries a message for us as well. Surrounded by forces far greater than ourselves, we may sometimes feel small, fragile, powerless. Yet Finn's philosophy whispers that our smallness does not diminish us. It gives our lives texture and meaning. Each choice we make, each kindness we offer, carries weight precisely because our time is limited. The monsters may be larger, the gods may be stronger, but it is our humanity that lets us love, change, and endure. By the time Finn had faced the Lich, Orgalorg, and Golb, he no longer saw himself as out of place in it. He saw himself as part of it, human, yes, but human in a way that mattered. His philosophy had carried him from being a lonely boy to being a figure of resilience, a reminder that even in a world of chaos and wonder, the human spirit could shine. And so segment 4 of his philosophy draws us to a quiet reflection. To be human among monsters is not to be weaker. it is to be essential. For without humanity, without the fleeting and fragile heart that dares to love in the face of despair, the world of Ooo would lose its balance. Finn's philosophy gave that balance form not through grand speeches, but through the simple act of living with courage and compassion in a land that often forgot such things. As his story turns now toward the next stage, we see the path ahead illuminated by new questions. If being human among monsters taught Finn the value of resilience and balance, what would happen when his own body, his own spirit, began to strain under the weight of time? How would his philosophy hold? Growth brought pain when identity shifted, when he faced not just the monsters outside him, but the changes within. The next chapter of Finn's journey brings us there, into the heart of growth, of loss, of identity, into the realization that being human means not only standing against the monsters of Ooo, but learning to live with the shadows inside one. Every child eventually learns that growing up is not only about getting taller or older, but about carrying the weight of change. For Finn, this truth came not in gentle whispers, but in trials that tested both his body and his spirit. His philosophy, once shaped by innocence and wonder, now had to reckon with pain, with loss, and with the question of who he truly was. Growth became a journey into identity, and identity a mirror reflecting both his strengths and his scars. One of the most visible symbols of this stage was the loss of his arm. For a boy whose sword had always been an extension of his courage, this wound struck at the heart of his identity. It was not just a limb he lost, it was a part of how he saw himself, how he imagined his role as a hero. In that moment, Finn confronted a fear deeper than any monster, the fear that he was no longer whole, no longer capable, no longer himself. Yet as painful as this loss was, it became one of the most profound teachers of his philosophy. Finn discovered that identity is not tied to perfection, nor to the absence of scars. Identity lives in the choices we continue to make, even when the world takes something from us. By adapting, by learning to fight differently, by refusing to let loss define him, Finn revealed a philosophy rooted in resilience. He showed us that pain does not erase who we are. It shapes us, deepens us, and often brings forth strengths we did not know we had. This resilience was not born overnight. There were moments when Finn struggled, when frustration and grief weighed heavy. But these struggles were themselves part of his growth. He learned that to be human is to stumble, to question, to feel the ache of imperfection. And in embracing that ache, rather than denying it, his philosophy grew more honest. Heroism, he realized, was not about being unbreakable. It was about learning how to live with what breaks. Growth also brought Finn into sharper contact with questions of identity beyond the physical. As he matured, he began to look inward, to wonder about who he was when the battles ended, when the sword was set aside. Was he defined only by his role as a hero, or was there something deeper, something more enduring beneath the surface? These questions marked a turning point in his philosophy. He began to see that identity is not static. It changes just as people change. And instead of resisting that truth, Finn allowed it to guide him. This openness to change can be seen in the way Finn's relationships shifted. Where once he had defined himself through the admiration of others, through his crushes and romances, he now began to define himself through self-knowledge. His philosophy taught him that while love can shape us, we must also learn to stand in our own truth, independent of how others see us. This was not an easy lesson, but it was one that gave Finn a greater sense of wholeness. The pains of growing up also came in subtler forms. Finn faced disappointments, betrayals, and the uncomfortable truth that not every story ends the way we wish. But rather than letting these moments make him bitter, he chose to let them teach him. He realized that identity is not only about who we are when life is kind, but who we become when life is difficult. In those moments, his philosophy of courage expanded into a philosophy of acceptance. And so, as Finn walked through the labyrinth of growth, his philosophy became more layered, more complex. The boy who once charged into danger without hesitation now carried scars, both visible and invisible. Yet these scars did not weaken him. They became reminders of his resilience, markers of the journey that had shaped him. His philosophy whispered that to grow is to change, to endure pain is to deepen, and to discover identity to embrace both light and shadow. Finn's struggle with identity did not stop at the physical. As he carried the memory of his lost arm and the strange paths that led him down, he also carried the weight of uncertainty about who he was becoming. Growing older meant that the simplicity of childhood gave way to questions that had no easy answer. He had been the boy hero, the protector of kingdom, the adventurer, always charging forward. But who was he when those roles grew heavy, when the world seemed to move faster in his own understanding? These questions often surfaced in quiet moments, when the sword was sheathed and the noise of battle fell silent. In those spaces, Finn discovered that growth could feel lonely. The people around him were changing too. Bubblegum growing more serious with her responsibilities, Jake exploring new facets of his own identity as a father and partner, Marceline navigating the echoes of her long past. Finn often found himself standing at a crossroads, not entirely sure where his path was leading. This uncertainty became part of his philosophy, that identity is not a destination, but a journey, and that confusion is not failure, but simply another step in becoming. Pain sharpened this philosophy further. The losses he endured, both small and great, carved deep lines of story. When relationships ended, he learned to carry the ache without letting it define him. When mistakes haunted him, he faced them rather than running away. Each hurt became a thread in the tapestry of his identity, and his philosophy began to embrace the idea that wholeness is not the absence of pain, but the integration of it. We are not broken by our struggles, but reshaped by them into something new. His encounters with his own past, his mother Minerva, the hidden human colony, the questions about his origins deepened these reflections. Meeting his mother was a revelation, but also a challenge. Her vision of safety and order was so different from the life Finn had lived. In her eyes, he saw another possible path, one defined by caution and preservation. Yet his philosophy resisted being confined to that vision. He realized that his identity was not something handed down to him by blood, but something he had to define for himself. Being human was not about returning to the ways of the past, but about embracing the life he had built in the present. Growth also meant accepting the ways he had changed from the boy he once was. The carefree innocence of his earliest adventures could not last forever. He had made mistakes, lost people he loved, and seen the fragility of the world he fought to protect. Yet instead of longing for the past, his philosophy turned toward acceptance. He came to understand that identity evolves with time, and that to cling to what was is to miss the beauty of what is becoming. This acceptance allowed him to continue growing, even when the process was painful. One of the most poignant aspects of this stage in Finn's life was his willingness to face vulnerability. He no longer hid from the truth that he could be hurt, both physically and emotionally. Instead, he embraced it as part of who he was. This vulnerability gave his philosophy depth, showing that strength is not the absence of weakness, but the courage to live openly despite it. His scars, his doubts, his mistakes, all of these became part of his identity, not as marks of failure, but as reminders of the life he had lived fully. In the eyes of others, Finn may have been a hero because of his sword, his victories, and his courage. But in truth, his heroism lay just as much in his philosophy. The quiet strength of accepting change, the bravery of facing pain without closing his heart, and the wisdom of allowing identity to remain fluid. His journey through growth and pain revealed that being human is not about holding on to a single version of yourself, but about becoming again and again through each challenge faced. One of the most striking aspects of Finn's growth is how his philosophy shifted from always charging forward to learning when to pause. In his younger years, the answer to every problem seemed to be the swing of a sword, the rush of battle, the courage to leap first and ask questions later. But as he matured, he began to realize that not every fight needed to be fought, and not every problem was meant to be solved with strength alone. This was not weakness, it was wisdom. His philosophy began to include restraint, patience, and the recognition that sometimes stepping back is the bravest choice of all. This shift reflected his growing awareness of identity. He started to ask himself if he was not always the warrior, then who was he? What did it mean to be Finn without the sword in hand? These questions led him into a deeper understanding of himself beyond the role of hero. He learned to value moments of peace, to sit with friends by the fire, to play music, to share laughter. His philosophy expanded to see identity not only in acts of courage, but in acts of presence, in simply being alive, in experiencing the small joys that give meaning to life. Pain often served as the doorway to these insights. The loss of his arm reminded him that identity cannot be tied to what we can or cannot do physically. The heartbreaks he endured reminded him that identity cannot be tied solely to how others see us. Even the mistakes he made taught him that identity is not erased by failure, but enriched by the lessons failure leaves behind. Each of these trials, though difficult, became part of the foundation of his philosophy, that growth is not linear, and that to embrace identity fully means to carry both triumph and sorrow together. What makes Finn's story so deeply human is the way he chose to integrate these lessons instead of running from them. He did not deny his scars or pretend to be untouched by pain. Instead, he allowed them to shape him into someone wiser, more compassionate, more balanced. His philosophy grew into something gentle but unshakable. That strength is not about never falling, but about rising each time with greater understanding of who you are. These reflections also gave him the ability to guide others. Younger adventurers and friends sometimes looked to him as an example, and while he never claimed perfection, he offered them honesty. His willingness to admit his doubts, his vulnerabilities, and his mistakes became a form of quiet leadership. His philosophy taught that identity is not about appearing flawless, but about embracing imperfection with sincerity. In this way, Finn embodied a kind of heroism that was no longer only about saving others, but about showing them how to live truthfully. In many ways, this stage of Finn's journey reveals the heart of growing up. We all begin with ideals, with visions of who we think we are meant to be. But as life unfolds, those visions are challenged, reshaped, sometimes shattered. Pain enters, change comes, and identity shifts. Finn's philosophy mirrors this universal truth. He shows us that growth does not mean becoming someone else entirely, but becoming more fully yourself, shaped by experience, defined by resilience, and softened by compassion. And so Finn's identity grew beyond the boy adventurer who once charged into danger without hesitation. He became a young man who understood the weight of his choices, the value of patience, and the strength of vulnerability. His scars no longer felt like marks of loss, but like symbols of the life he had lived. His philosophy whispered that to grow is to change, to hurt is to deepen, and to question is to move closer to truth. In Ooo, surrounded by immortals and cosmic beings, Finn's journey of growth and pain may have seemed small in comparison. But in truth, it was immense. For what is more profound than learning how to be human, to carry both joy and sorrow, to stand both as a hero and as a person, to embrace identity in all its shifting form? Finn's philosophy of growth, pain, and identity gives voice to the quiet courage of becoming. And in doing so, it reflects the journey we all take in our own way. As Finn's path continued, the changes within him became just as important as the battles he fought. His philosophy was no longer the philosophy of a boy running forward with wide eyes and boundless hope. It was the philosophy of someone who had been broken and rebuilt, who had lost and found, who had grown into a self that could carry both light and shadow without letting either overwhelm him. Growth had taught him that identity is not about being fixed, but about flowing like a river, reshaping itself over time. One of the clearest signs of this maturity was his willingness to accept when things ended. Childhood friendships shifted, relationships changed, even adventures quieted. Instead of clinging to what once was, Finn's philosophy embraced impermanence. He saw that each ending was not a collapse, but a transformation. Just as the loss of his arm had become part of his strength, so too did the endings in his life become part of his story. This acceptance freed him from despair and gave him the peace to move forward with openness, ready to meet whatever came next. His sense of identity also became less tied to external roles. In the past, he may have defined himself as the last human or the hero of Ooo. But as he grew, he realized that these labels, while meaningful, were not the essence of who he was. At his core, Finn was simply himself, a person who cared, who chose, who lived fully in the time he was given. His philosophy no longer demanded that he live up to some grand destiny. It reminded him that identity is found in authenticity, in the daily act of being true to your heart. This authenticity gave him the ability to face the world with calm strength. When confronted with the challenges, he no longer acted out of a need to prove himself. He acted out of love, out of care, out of a grounded sense of self. The boy who once sought validation in victory had become the young man who found meaning and presence in being there for his friends, in protecting the vulnerable, in living his life with integrity. Pain, too, continued to leave its marks. But Finn no longer feared those marks. He welcomed them as reminders of his humanity. He understood that scars, whether on the body or the heart, are not signs of weakness, but of survival. His philosophy taught him that we are shaped most deeply by what we endure, and that identity is not diminished by pain, but refined by it. This acceptance gave him a serenity that radiated to those around him, a quiet assurance that they too could carry their struggles with dignity. Through all of this, Finn's growth revealed something universal, that becoming oneself is never a straight line. It is a winding path filled with questions, setbacks, and revelation. His philosophy did not pretend to erase uncertainty. Instead, it embraced it as part of the journey. To be human, Finn discovered, is to live in the tension between who we were, who we are, and who we are becoming. And in that tension lies beauty, for it means we are always alive, always changing, always capable of becoming more. By the time this chapter of his life came to rest, Finn's philosophy of growth, pain, and identity had settled into something steady and clear. It told him that being human is not about being unbroken, but about being whole in the midst of imperfection. It told him that identity is not something handed down or fixed in stone, but something lived, shaped each day by our choices. And it told him that growth, though often painful, is the path through which we discover the fullness of ourselves. And so the boy who once defined himself through his sword, his victories, and his innocence had become someone much deeper. He had learned to hold his scars with pride, to carry his heartbreaks with gentleness, and to face his doubts with courage. His philosophy had grown into a lantern he could carry with him, one that illuminated not only his own path, but the paths of those who walked beside him. As Finn stepped further into maturity, the philosophy that had guided him through childhood, through heroism, through love, and through pain began to settle into something gentler, something quieter. No longer was every day defined by battles against monsters or quests for kingdoms. Instead, Finn entered a stage of life where the sword at his side mattered less than the peace in his heart. His philosophy, once centered on bravery and survival, now grew into something wider, a philosophy of living. In his younger years, he had defined himself by his action. He was the boy who fought the Lich, the hero who rescued princesses, the last human standing against chaos. But as time passed, Finn began to see that identity could not rest forever on battles won. For what happens when the fighting stops? Who are we when there are no more monsters to defeat, no more kingdoms to defend? These questions became the doorway into the final stage of his philosophy, the journey beyond heroism. The answers revealed themselves not in grand adventures, but in small, tender moments, sitting quietly with Jake, watching the horizon, sharing laughter with Marceline as he strummed music beneath the stars, walking through the Candy Kingdom and seeing the joy of people who lived freely because danger had been held at bay. These moments taught Finn that heroism had never been about the fight itself. It had always been about what the fight was meant to protect, the ordinary beauty of life. This realization reshaped his philosophy. Where once he had seen meaning in the clash of swords, he now saw meaning in stillness, in connection, in simply existing. He began to understand that battles are temporary, but the life they defend is enduring. His philosophy turned toward cherishing the present, finding value not in the next quest, but in the smile of a friend, in the warmth of a fire, in the peace of a quiet night. Finn also began to release the weight of needing to be the hero. He understood that others could protect Ooo, that kingdoms could rise without him, that even his dearest friends had their own paths to walk. Instead of seeing this as a loss, he embraced it with humility. His philosophy told him that legacy is not about being the one who saves everything, but about inspiring others to carry the flame. By stepping back, by trusting the world to go on without his constant protection, Finn revealed the depth of his maturity. This stage of life brought with it a new kind of freedom. Freed from the constant urgency of battle, Finn's philosophy turned inward. He explored not only who he was in the eyes of others, but who he was when he stood alone. He discovered that being human is not only about courage in the face of monsters, but about gentleness in the face of oneself. To live beyond heroism was to accept that life does not need to be extraordinary to be meaningful. The ordinary, in all its fleeting beauty, is enough. Yet this did not mean Finn abandoned heroism altogether. Rather, he wove it into the fabric of daily life. Protecting others, offering kindness, choosing courage, these remained part of him, but no longer defined him entirely. His philosophy became more spacious, more balanced, recognizing that to be human is to hold both the extraordinary and the ordinary together. He could be a hero when needed, but he could also be simply Finn, a friend, a brother, a human being at peace. As Finn allowed himself to rest from the constant rhythm of battle, he began to notice details he had once rushed past. The way the trees swayed in the breeze on the edges of the grasslands, the sound of Marceline's laughter echoing like music in the twilight, the warmth of Jake's presence beside him, steady and comforting, even when no words were spoken. These small moments, once overlooked in the rush of adventure, became the centerpieces of his philosophy. He began to realize that meaning does not always reveal itself in the thunder of victory. Sometimes it whispers in the quiet of an ordinary day. This shift was not a rejection of heroism, but a recognition of its purpose. Every battle he had fought, every risk he had taken, was to preserve these simple joys. The philosophy of his younger self had driven him to fight against cosmic monsters and world-ending threats. The philosophy of his older self told him that the truest victory was not in defeating them, but in creating space for life to continue. By embracing this truth, Finn stepped beyond the narrow role of hero and into the broader role of human being. There was a humility in this stage of his life. He no longer needed to be the one who stood tallest, the one who carried the heaviest weight. He trusted that others, his friends, the people of Ooo, even the generations to come, would find their own strength. This trust became part of his philosophy, a recognition that legacy is not control. Legacy is faith, the belief that what you have lived, what you have taught, will ripple outward in ways you may never see. Even in times when danger returned, Finn's approach was different. He no longer rushed forward with reckless energy. He approached with calm, thoughtfulness, with the wisdom of someone who had faced loss and learned from it. His philosophy revealed that true courage is not always about speed or force, but about clarity, knowing why you fight and what you are fighting for. Each action carried more weight because it came from reflection rather than impulse. And in this way, Finn's humanity came full circle. As a child, he had once believed that to be a hero was to fight monsters and save kingdoms. Now he believed that to be human was to cherish life in all its forms, even when no monsters threatened. His philosophy broadened from the urgency of battle into the serenity of living. He no longer needed to seek meaning in victory. He found it in the laughter of friends, in the resilience of Ooo, and in the peace of simply being alive. This stage of Finn's life carries a wisdom that feels almost like a lullaby. It reminds us that life is not only about what we accomplish, but about how we live, how we care, and how we connect. Finn's philosophy teaches that to go beyond heroism is to discover that the truest form of strength lies not in standing above the world, but in standing within it, gently and fully present. As Finn leaned into this gentler philosophy, he began to reflect on legacy, not the kind carved into monuments or sung in endless tales, but the legacy of presence, The subtle way one life touches another and then another until it shapes the world in unseen ripple. Finn realized that beyond the monsters he had defeated and the kingdoms he had saved, his truest impact lay in the people he had loved, encouraged, and inspired. Jake, more than anyone, carried this ripple. Their bond had always been the foundation of Finn's story, and as Jake grew older, Finn discovered that the role of protector was not only about standing against enemies, but also about cherishing the time they had together. Sitting quietly beside Jake, watching the stars, Finn's philosophy turned toward gratitude. He learned that legacy is not only what remains after we are gone, but also what we nurture while we are here. Every shared laugh, every song, every act of kindness, these were his true victory. Marceline, too, carried the mark of his influence, even as she shaped him in return. Their friendship reminded him that the walls people build can be softened by patience, that even those scarred by centuries can still find joy in the present. With Bubblegum, he learned that respect and care can endure long after love has shifted. With Huntress Wizard, he found that companionship does not need permanence to hold meaning. Through these bonds, his philosophy stretched beyond himself, reminding him that humanity does not live in isolation. It flourishes in connection, in the threads we weave between one another. Finn also reflected on impermanence with new clarity. Where once he may have sought permanence, a love that lasted forever, an identity set in stone, a role that never changed, he now saw that the beauty of life lay in its constant motion. His philosophy embraced the truth that nothing lasts unchanged, and that this is not something to mourn, but something to celebrate. For if everything endured the same forever, there would be no growth, no transformation, no chance for renewal. Impermanence gave life its tenderness, its poignancy, its meaning. In this way, Finn's story began to echo the wisdom of the very forces he had once fought against. The Lich taught him that endings were inevitable. Golb taught him that chaos would always exist. But where those beings twisted these truths into despair, Finn shaped them into hope. Yes, everything ends, but that is why we cherish. Yes, chaos will come, but that is why we choose order, kindness, and care. His philosophy turned cosmic inevitabilities into human resilience. Living beyond heroism also gave Finn time to look inward. He asked not only what he could do for others, but how he wanted to live for himself. His philosophy grew to include self-acceptance, the recognition that his scars, his mistakes, his doubts were not things to overcome, but things to embrace. He no longer needed to prove his worth through endless battle. He had already proven it by living, by caring, by being himself. This self-acceptance became one of the final pieces of his philosophy, a lantern glowing softly as he walked further into maturity. And so Finn's legacy was not written in crowns or thrones, but in laughter, in friendship, in love, in the quiet philosophy he carried. He had become more than the Child of Ooo, more than the hero of Ooo. He had become the human of Ooo, a symbol of mortality embraced, of impermanence cherished, of life lived fully and gently in a world that had almost forgotten what it meant to be human. In the end, Finn's philosophy reached a place of balance. He had walked through innocence, through heroism, through love and heartbreak, through pain and growth. Now, beyond heroism, he stood in a quieter truth, that being human is not about endless striving, but about learning how to live with openness, gratitude, and peace. The boy who once leapt into every battle had become someone who could rest, who could sit beneath a sky of stars and know that his life carried meaning simply because he had lived it fully. This balance was not the absence of challenge. Even in his later years, Ooo still held mysteries, dangers, and shifts of power. But Finn no longer felt the need to bear them all on his shoulders. He trusted in the resilience of others, in the strength of the friendships he had nurtured, and in the enduring rhythms of life itself. His philosophy whispered that the world does not need one hero forever. It needs many voices, many hands, each contributing their part. By stepping back, Finn gave space for others to rise, for the story of Ooo to continue beyond him. Jake's presence lingered especially strongly in this philosophy. Their bond, tested by time and deepened by shared struggle, revealed to Finn the truth that love and companionship are not measured by permanence, but by depth. Even as Jake aged and their paths changed, Finn carried forward the warmth of their years together. His philosophy told him that love does not vanish with loss. It transforms, living on in memory, in influence, in the ways we are changed by those we cherish. Finn's later reflections also circled back to the great forces he had faced. Where once he had fought the Lich with steel, he now understood that the truest opposition to despair is not destruction, but creation. The creation of laughter, of friendship, of small acts of kindness that ripple outward. Where once he had resisted Galb's chaos with fear, he now saw that chaos was not something to conquer, but something to live meaningfully alongside. His philosophy carried the humility of one who no longer sought to control the world, but to be present within it. In this way, Finn's story speaks to us not as the tale of a perfect hero, but as the reflection of our own human journey. We too must learn to accept scars, to endure loss, to face uncertainty. We too must find identity not in roles handed to us, but in the choices we make. And we too must eventually step beyond the rush of striving to discover the quiet beauty of simply living. Finn's philosophy becomes a mirror, reminding us that heroism may begin in grand gesture, but it finds its truest form in the gentle courage of everyday life. And so, as his tale drifts into calm, Finn stands not in the shadow of battle, but in the glow of presence. He is no longer only the child of Ooo, no longer only the hero of Ooo. He is Finn, the human, a person who loved, who lost, who grew, who discovered that beyond every trial lies a deeper wisdom. His philosophy, shaped by every step of his journey, settles into a single truth, that to live is enough. This is the philosophy that carries him and that carries us into rest. For when the fighting is done, when the questions quiet, when the night falls, what remains is not victory or defeat. What remains is the life we have lived, the love we have shared, the presence we have offered to the world. Finn's story teaches us to hold these things gently, to honor them, and to let them guide us into peace. And with that, our reflection on Finn's philosophy comes to its gentle close. 6 stages of growth, 6 steps in a journey from innocence to wisdom, from heroism to humanity. Each part a reminder that, though we may never wield a sword or face cosmic monsters, we too can live with the same courage and gentleness that Finn discovered. His philosophy belongs not only to him, but to all of us, whispered softly in the quiet of the night. Good night.